In 1984, a skyscraper went up in New York that looks like someone put a piece of antique furniture on top of a glass tower. The AT&T building had a split pediment at the top, shaped like the crown of Chippendale highware dresser, the kind of thing your grandmother might have owned. Architects had spent 50 years stripping building down to steel and glass, and here was Philip Johnson, who helped build that Hawkline look, sticking a giant furniture ornament on a skyscraper in Manhattan. The architectural language we just saw is known as a postmodernism, cultural, intellectual, and artistic movement that emerged in the late 1960s and became influential during the 1970s and 1980s. It developed as a skeptical response to modernism, questioning its beliefs in strict rules, emphasizing pluralism, and expressing disbeliefs in ground ideologies. Why did this happen? Why did designers start breaking every rule modernists spent decades building? Let's discover what everyone was rebelling against first. In the interwar period and during much of the 20th century, modernism became the most influential architectural movement. It emerged as a response to rapid industrialization and profound social changes across Europe, with architects rejecting historical styles in decorative ornament in favor of structural design. One of the most urgent challenges of the interwar period was the need for affordable housing. In response, architects such as Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, Arrid Mendelssohn, and Walter Gropius designed experimental housing estates that aimed to meet the growing demand for accessible homes. The movement was guided by the principle that form should follow function, meaning better buildings design should be determined primarily by its purpose. To make housing more accessible, modernist architects promoted industrialized construction technique using steel, concrete, and glass, making large-scale construction faster and more economical. Besides this, eventually evolved into the international style, which spread across the world after the Second World War. What had begun as a radical architectural vision gradually became the new standard. By the 1960s, countless office towers, apartment blocks, and commercial buildings looked remarkably similar, with glass curtain walls, steel frames, flat roofs, simple geometric forms. The language that had once symbolized innovation was now associated with corporate architecture and urban uniformity. Modernist ideas also spread far beyond architecture. Furniture became simpler and industrial, while decorative details disappeared in favor of clean geometric forms. However, by the late 1960s, many critics argued that cities had become repetitive and emotionally detached. Buildings performed their function efficiently, yet many people struggled to developing emotional connection to them. Endless rows of nearly identical office towers ignored the local identity, history, and culture. Architects began to question that their efficiency alone was enough to create places that people generally enjoyed. That question would eventually give birth to postmodernism. One of the earliest and most influential figures in this shift was the American architect Robert Venturi. Venturi began developing his critique of orthodox modernism through his architectural work before fully explaining it in writing. One of his first major projects was the Von Venturi house, designed for his mother in Chestnut Hill, Philadelphia. He began designing the 5-bedroom house in 1959, and it was completed between 1962 and 1964. Today, it is widely regarded as one of the earliest buildings that anticipate many of the ideas that later define postmodern architecture. Like the strict geometric clarity of modernism, the house introduced ambiguity. Its facade appears symmetrical at first glance, yet subtle asymmetries emerged in the closer inspection. A large central chimney dominates the composition, a decorative arch frames the entrance without performing a structural role, and one staircase famously leads nowhere. During approximately the same period, Venturi designed the Guild House in Philadelphia, a residential building for elderly people with limited incomes. Designed in the early 1960s, the structure borrowed elements from classical orders, along with signage that became part of the building facade. Among the most distinctive features was a large television antenna placed on the roof, symbolizing television as an important part of everyday lives. In 1966, Venturi brought many of his ideas together in his book Complexity and Contradiction in Architecture. In the book, he argued that cities had never been simple, orderly places, so why should architecture to pretend they were real urban environments were layered and full of historical references, so he believed that good architecture should acknowledge that complexity. He even picked a fight with Miss van der Rohe directly. Miss has his famous line, "Less is more," which Venturi flipped into 3 words: less is a bore. Venturi didn't call for a return to classic architecture. He argued that history should once again play a role in architectural design, and historical references could be combined with modern materials, new technologies, and contemporary ways of living. By the late 1960s, Venturi went further with his wife and design partner Dennis Scott Brown. Dennis brought a particularly strong interest to urbanism and commercial landscapes. In the 1960s, most architects saw Las Vegas as barely a real city. Casinos, neon signs, enormous parking lot, and motels were considered tasteless and an example of bad urbanism. Venturi and Dennis Scott Brown set out on an expedition to study the city. Architects had long believed that buildings should express only its function, but in Las Vegas, they came to a different conclusion. They realized that giant signs, neon lights, and advertising communicated everything people need to know. In other words, it was no longer the building form that created the architecture, it was communication. The research became the 1972 book Learning from Las Vegas, written by Venturi, Scott Brown, and Stephen Eisenhower. In the book, they divided building into 2 categories, the dark and the decorated shed. A dark is a building whose forms tells you exactly what it is. It represents its function through its shape and construction. A classic example is a deck-shaped building that sells docks. A decorated shed, on the other hand, is an ordinary rectangular building. Its meaning comes from signs, logos, and advertising. It relies on imagery and stigmate rather than architectural form. As living standards improved, Western societies enter an era of mass consumption. Television, advertising, magazines, popular music, and consumer products transformed culture, while cities became shaped by standardized architecture. This cultural shift gave rise of pop art in the mid-1950s, which sparked postmodernism by breaking down the barrier between high art and mass culture, using irony, consumer imagery, and quotation, borrowing, repetition, and reinterpretation of familiar images. Intellectual development also played a crucial role in shaping their foundation of postmodernism. Among intellectual sociologists, John Baudrillard examined the rapid growth of consumer culture and mass media. He argued that modern society was increasingly shaped by images and advertising through shopping centers, television, and commercial branding, as well as through direct encounters with buildings. Another important influence came from anthropologist Claude Lévi-Strauss and his concept of bricolage. With this, Strauss described the bricoleur as someone who constructs new meaning by rearranging existing materials and cultural references. This idea would later explain why postmodern architects felt comfortable combining classical columns with neon lighting or placing historical ornament on modern skyscraper. One of the first architects to put Venturi's theories into practice was Charles Moore. His Piazza d'Italia, completed in New Orleans in 1978, remains one of the clearest expressions of postmodern architecture. Designed as a public square celebrating the city's Italian-American community, it is filled with references to classic and Renaissance architecture. There are Roman columns, triumphal arches, fountains, and maps of Italy, yet none of these elements are presented with this historical accuracy. Moore transformed history into theater. Michael Grace ran further. In 1982, he finished the Portland building in Oregon. Michael Grace painted the thing in cream and pale blue and a deep red, colors nobody used on a public building before. It was a box wearing classical architecture like a costume. This same instinct showed up across the world, and every country gave it a different accent. Aldo Rossi in Italy built with simple geometric shapes, cones, and cylinders, but arranged them to echo old Italian piazzas and cemetery architecture. James Starlin in Britain mixed Egyptian-looking cornices with bright pinks and greens on buildings like the New Strauss Gallery in Stuttgart, blending museum traditions with color choices that felt cartoonish next to it. Hans Helein in Austria and his half-house in Vienna grew in glass against the medieval city center. Frank Gehry setting his own corner on this moment too before he became known for the swooping metal building people recognize today. His early houses and small commercial buildings in the late 1970s and early 1980s used cheap materials, chain link fencing, plywood, corrugated metal arranged at odd angles that felt a little unfinished on purpose. But by the 1990s, it landed somewhere critics started calling deconstructivism. Every one of them borrowed pieces of history, a column, a pediment, an arch, and none of them were trying to rebuild the past accurately. While architects transformed architectural practice, other groups pursued a far more radical agenda. Groups including Superstudio, Archizoom, Archigram, Endform, and Kulphem-Blau, influenced by student protest, environmental conscience, and anti-consumer movements, used modernism playing as increasingly intertwined with bureaucracy and capitalism. They were not architects, but artists who created speculative collages, films, and conceptual projects that criticized contemporary society. Instead of designing buildings, they used existing architecture as a medium for political and cultural reflection. An anchor interpretation of these ideas appeared in the work of the architectural collective site, which collaborated with the retail company Best Products during the 1970s. Encouraged by company founder Sidney Lewis, an enthusiastic supporter of contemporary art, Best commissioned a series of experimental showroom designs. Among the most notable examples was the Pilling building in Richmond, Virginia, where a section of the brick facade appeared to peel away and expose the plain slag structure behind. The indeterminate facade in Houston presented a collapsing brick wall spilling over the entrance canopy, while the chilled building in Tulsa, Maryland, appeared to lift one corner of its facade from the ground. The Notch building in Sacramento completed the series by introducing a large cut into the building envelope, creating the illusion that part of the structure had been removed. Other artists explored similar ideas. Gianni Padena Ice House covered an ordinary suburban house with layers of frozen water until it became completely enclosed in ice. He suggested that nature could become an active participant in shaping architecture. A modern example is No Stop City by Archizoom. This conceptual project imagined an endless city shaped entirely by consumerism and mass production. Archizoom criticized the rational ideas of modernism and questioned whether endless urban expansion could create a meaningful living environment. During the late 1970s and 1980s, the principle that had reshaped architecture spread into nearly every creative discipline, particularly interior and furniture design. Among them was the Italian industrial designer Ettore Sottsass. Born in 1917 in Innsbruck, Austria, and raised in Turin, Italy, he developed an interest in architecture while growing up in a family of architects. After completing his studies at the Polytechnic University of Turin, Sottsass gained experience working with his father's architectural office before settling in Milan, where he became involved in the city's growing design community. During the 1950s, he started collaborating with Alvietti, one of Italy's leading manufacturers of typewriter, calculator, and office equipment. In the late 1960s, working alongside British industrial designer Perry King, he designed one of his best-known works, the Valentine typewriter. Introduced in 1969, the bright red typewriter became an icon of modern industrial design and helped establish Sottsass as one of the leading designers of his generation. In 1980, a group of designers met in Ettore Sottsass' apartment in Milan, and they needed a name for what they were about to do. A Bob Dylan record was playing in the background, stuck inside of mobile with the Memphis Blues again. And someone just grabbed the word of the turntable, Memphis. Memphis Milano officially presented itself to the public in 1981 at the Salon de Mobile. In their furniture, they used bright colors, laminates, geometric patterns in asymmetrical forms. Plastic laminate, previously associated with inexpensive kitchen furniture, appeared alongside marble, glass, steel, and terrazzo. Underneath all the color and the old angles, Memphis was choosing to bring some joy back into the object. Let a chair or a shelf carry a symbol, a joke, or a personality. But Memphis wasn't the only group challenging design. Studio Alchimia was founded at Sandro Guerriero in Milan in 1976, several years before the Memphis group. Studio used Claude Lévi-Strauss' bricolage strategy. Their furniture might combine Art Deco geometry, classical ornament, industrial laminates, comic book colors, and references to popular culture. One of its best-known works, Spruce Chair, designed by Alessandro Mandini, which reinterpreted a traditional Baroque armchair by covering it with colorful patterns inspired by the paintings of Paul Signac. And this same energy wasn't staying inside furniture showroom either. Painters and graphic designers were about to run the exact same rebellion. Over in Eduard, printers were gearing up their own rule book at the same time. Julian Schnabel started smashing plates and gluing the broken pieces straight onto his canvases, then painting over the top of them. So you're looking at a portrait that's also a pile of shattered ceramics sticking off the wall. They did sale worked a different angle, layering images on top of each other on the same canvas. Album cover and posters through the 1980s started using type that clashed on purpose, one bold fairy font crashing into a thin italic on the same page. None of this happened in a vacuum. MT launched in 1981, and suddenly music videos needed a visual language that moved fast and grabbed attention in second, which meant mixing styles, bad out anything clean or restrained. Photographer Cindy Sherman explored similar questions through her celebrated Untitled Film Stills series. Sherman adapted dozens of fictional female identities of herself inspired by cinema, advertising, and popular culture. Each image appeared familiar, yet none represented her real self. But energy couldn't stay at full volume forever, though. By the late 1980s and into the 1990s, critics started calling the whole things exhausted. Minimalism started creeping back and kind of relief after all that noise. Postmodernism proved design could be funny and symbolic and personal again, not just efficient, and that argument never went away.